Welcome back, Senior Devs. Sean Cannon here. In this lesson, we're going to talk about becoming the jack of all trades, master of some. Part of becoming a senior software engineer is learning how to recognize opportunities to expand your skill set away from your core competencies so that you can consider more moving pieces when making technical decisions, delegating tasks, and so on. For this, we use what's known as the 80-20 rule, which states that 80% of the yield is derived from 20% of the work, and 20% of the yield is derived from 80% of the work. This principle was created by Italian economist Vilfredo Pareto in 1897 when he observed that 80% of the land in England was owned by 20% of the population. He went on to observe the same thing in multiple other countries, and since then we've seen that it carries over to practically any aspect of life where 20% of your effort will result in 80% of the results. The trick, of course, is to do some comprehensive analysis so we can objectively determine what that 20% is and focus our energy on that. Imagine you have a tool belt, and every skill that applies to your career is attached to it. Which skills do you keep in the front for easy access, and which do you keep in the back that you rarely use? If we follow the idea that 20% of your skills will account for 80% of your career growth potential, then we need to make sure those skills are also accounting for 80% of your attention. Consider these 5 languages from my tool belt, and let's pretend that these are the only 5 skills that I know: XML, ActionScript, Perl, JavaScript, and Cold Fusion. One of these 5 languages, or 20% of the list, will likely account for 80% of my career growth potential. Can you spot it? Well, the answer of course is JavaScript, as the other 4 languages are a dying breed. So of this list, my master of some would be JavaScript mastery. Now, that doesn't mean that I won't work on a project in the future that uses any of these other languages. We get clients all the time with legacy systems, and I absolutely need to know my way around these systems if we have any hope of migrating their application to newer technologies. This is where the jack of all trades comes in. Imagine I only coded JavaScript. I wouldn't be necessarily ineligible to work on the other projects I just mentioned, but I certainly wouldn't be included in the kickoff meetings, and I wouldn't likely be working directly with the client. I'd probably just get tickets to write JS code for new stuff, which is fine, but that's not career growth, that's just a career. Imagine we take that list of 5 skills and turn it into a list of 100 skills. That of course means that you should be extremely competent at 20 of those skills and admitted novice for the remaining 80. For example, I haven't worked on Cold Fusion in over 15 years, but I'm fully confident I could be assigned to a CF migration project tomorrow and get my bearings in an hour or 2. That's kind of where you want to be. Your goal here should be constantly collecting skills to add to your tool belt. These don't all have to be programming languages. For example, I'm extremely competent with Git, and I use the CLI most of the time, but I've also used Subversion and Perforce on previous projects, as well as straight up FTP for projects that don't have any version control system set up. A similar example, I'm extremely competent with GitHub, but I've also interfaced a bit with GitLab, Bitbucket, SourceForge, CGS repos, and AWS Code Commit, and I don't typically recommend any of the services over GitHub because I think GitHub is probably the most developer friendly, but if I'm all in on GitHub and neglect to even speak of those other services, then that really restricts me as a consultant. In contrast, being able to speak about a variety of tools and services really helps me build rapport with the prospective clients and employers. So what are some examples of less obvious skills that you need to have on your tool belt? What about something like written communication? Being able to convey intent in a written message without wasting people's time, causing confusion, or stirring up emotions is actually not an easy skill, and it's a fantastic skill to have on your tool belt. Have you ever read an email or chat message from someone on your team that made you question that person's competence? Or maybe it left an impression on you that made you want to avoid working with that person entirely? Seriously, every project has at least one person like that, who comes off as a total asshole in writing, even if they're not necessarily like that in person. They sound condescending or judgmental, or are always complaining about something. And people have a tendency to remember the way they feel they are treated by other people, so this is clearly not a good thing. Another example of a less obvious skill could be working with other teams through your issue tracking system. It doesn't matter if it's Trello, Pivotal, Jira, GitHub Issues, and so on. The skills are the same. When I'm done working on a ticket, I like to attach some proof that I've verified the acceptance criteria on my end. Sometimes it's a screenshot or a video capture, sometimes I'll paste an API response, or maybe a link to a URL that just proves an endpoint is working. Just anything to show that I did my due diligence and didn't just toss the ticket over the fence to the product or QA team. Not only does this help the people on those teams do their job, but they also appreciate the effort I make, and if they happen to experience a result on their end that's different from the attached proof, then instead of a he said she said scenario, they'll usually try to troubleshoot it on their end for much longer before kicking the ticket back to me, because odds are the issue is on their end and the ticket is fine. Hopefully you can see here how much you can benefit from having a wide variety of skills outside your comfort zone. This 80-20 principle will follow you throughout your career, so make a point to get ahead of it whenever you can to use it to your advantage. When you get to a leadership position, you'll likely observe that 20% of your dev team will do 80% of the work, and of course the remaining 80% of the dev team will do 20% of the work. It'll be up to you as a manager to recognize those high performers and pair them up with the low performers to help balance the team's velocity. Because as nice as it is to have a rock star on the team, as engineering managers, we need to recognize that devs come and go, and the team's confidence needs to be able to survive staff transitions. I mention this because as you start applying these modules to your career and become a high performer, you're going to be in that 20% bucket that's delivering 80% of the team's output. Initially, you might feel like you're being punished for having to pair up with devs that don't share that drive and enthusiasm that you do, but just know that you're starting to become a mentor, and that is exactly where you want to be. That wraps up this module. Keep growing, and I'll see you in the next one.